everyone, and welcome to our recording today. We are going to review the whole school, whole community, whole child, or WSC team training modules. And we have Christi Kay, the president of HealthMPowers, to talk with us. My name is Jordan Buckley, the school health program manager at Sophe, the Society for Public Health Education, and I'll be moderating this conversation. And I'd like to welcome Christi. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks, Jordan. I'm excited to be here.
Thanks, Christi. We've been working with Christi for about 2 years now to release the WSC team training modules. We released the WSC modules earlier this year in 2020, and over about 1 year of really exciting work. And the WSC modules are now out in the field, and we have been working with states and schools and doing some trainings. And we thought it would be really great to talk a little bit more about what these WSC modules are and how they can be used by any state or any school. And I'll really let Christi go into that and not steal her thunder. But we want to know why they were developed and how anybody could really use them, and what some next steps might be. So Christi, I will let you take it away.
So in terms of, I think we need to start off with what are the modules. And so these training modules are really a compilation of, 10 different trainings that are focused on building capacity at both the school and the district level. And they're built around helping schools and districts implement the WSC model. They were basically designed to help both school and district teams improve their knowledge and skills to go about creating meaningful change in schools. As we all know, the WSC model is a framework for improving both health and learning for students in our nation's schools. It calls for greater alignment and integration between education and health, while also emphasizing, as you can see by the graphic here, also emphasizing that it encourages school-wide engagement and community support. The model is a result of collaboration, as you know, from two of our national leaders, the whole child approach from the Association of Supervision and Curriculum Development, ASCD, and the coordinated school health approach from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC. Both those models were integrated into what we have now as the WSC model, and really help to demonstrate that symbiotic relationship between health and learning.
Thank you, Christi. That's a really great introduction. I think the next question we might want to ask is, what informed the development of the modules?
Great question, Jordan. And I will tell you, it was a lot of experts, a lot of leaders and practitioners from around the country. When Sophe and HealthMPowers first embarked on this project, we looked out in the field and we saw that there were a number of outstanding guides and resources already available to schools on implementing the WSC model. So we didn't want to recreate another guide, but what we saw was that there was a gap in professional development to support the implementation. So these training modules were created to be used in conjunction with those other resources. So we really see these training modules as supplemental, to some of the great work that's already out there. To develop these, we went right to schools. We interviewed 28 schools that were at various levels of engagement with the WSC model. So we talked with schools that had not started any kind of implementation, and we talked with schools that had full-blown WSC teams and were doing great work. So we really wanted to understand the landscape and where schools were in implementation. And in this discovery, we found that there were schools that had WSC teams, but there were other schools that had what they called school health teams or wellness teams. And so they went by lots of different names. And so when we talk about the WSC team training, we're really talking about how you form a team to implement the WSC model. And so it really doesn't matter what you call the team. It's just trying to focus on the implementation of the WISC framework. And what we saw when we interviewed all of these schools is that, lots of great work is being done across the country. We had some very enlightening and encouraging, conversations. But the other thing that we tried to do was to look at schools that had been supported by ASCD and schools that had been supported by CDC, and kind of look at the similarities and the differences. And what we landed on by listening to all of these practitioners, as well as we had an advisory committee of national experts and practitioners at the school and district level. After listening to all of that, we put this to, we put all of that information together and decided on, 10 topic areas that we'll talk about a little bit later.
So once you identified all of this great information that was out there in the field and by both of these sectors, how did you decide who the modules were designed for?
Well, in our conversations, we really narrowed in on, we wanted it to be focused on the schools because that's where children are. That's where the WISC model will be, would be implemented. So while the modules are designed for implementation at the school level, we wanted to design them, though, so that district leaders, state education agencies, state departments of health, and other organizations that support schools, that they would be able to use these trainings to provide in-person professional development for schools. So what we see is, these modules, we could see, for example, state leaders bringing together leaders from schools and training them with these modules. And then those people would be able to take it back and provide the training at their school level. But we also tried to write them in such a way that somebody at the school who was passionate about bringing, the WISC model in could pick up these trainings and deliver them at the school.
So let's go into the modules. Could you tell me how the modules are organized?
Yes, we were very deliberate in how we organize these, because we really wanted it to be easy for virtually anyone to implement. Of course, we want people that have had some kind of training, but in the resources, we do provide information about how to facilitate a group and how to set up a training. So there is that background information that's provided. But each of the modules basically are set up the exact same way. There's a training script, and the training script contains everything that, everything that you'll need. It has every module has an agenda. Every module has, the key objectives that we're trying to address. It has a materials list. It covers the essential content. So you don't have to be an expert in this. It doesn't tell you to, discuss group norms. We tell you exactly what group norms are. We define it. We give you basically the training script. And then there are interactive activities that are built into the training script, as well as processing questions. We really tried to build them so that anybody, would be able to implement them. Now, high season trainers, they're going to be able to take these training scripts and personalize them and add to them. So the training script is the main guide, but then there's a PowerPoint deck that goes with that. And what we did, some people find it very helpful to have notes, on the PowerPoint slides. So we have done that so people can use just the regular PowerPoint. They can print off the PowerPoint notes, and then they have all of the notes that are in the training script built into the PowerPoint. So they have two different resources that they can use. And then finally, the third document is a handout packet. And that handout packet basically contains any worksheets that are going to be needed during the training. They are going to contain all of the kind of the essential content that we want the participants walking away with. So we wanted them to have something that they could reflect on, that they could build on, when they leave the training. So again, the modules are very well scripted. so that anybody can, really can implement them. But again, we design them in such a way that they're interactive, they're engaging. It is not somebody, sitting at the or standing up in the front of the group and talking the whole time. So it's really a facilitated model. And so the person will be providing some information, but will really be gathering, input, from the schools, because there are a lot of decisions that have to be made, and there are lots of ways that we need to personalize this. And so that's how the trainings are organized, and that's how they were really designed.
That sounds really interactive. So here's another one I'm going to throw at you. Could you tell me about the training topics?
Yes, and that was when we met with leaders from across the country, and tried to narrow in what were the the topic areas that would need to be included. It was there was so much need, and originally we were only looking at 4 or 5 modules, and it just expanded, because as we talked with more and more people, there were different needs, because what we saw when we interviewed schools is there are schools that have not started this, and what they need in terms of training is very different from the people that have had a school health team or a WISC team operating for a number of years. So trying to build something that would be hopefully helpful to all schools, we landed on 10 different topic areas. And so the first 5 that we developed are really for those schools that are just starting out, or some of those teams that just need kind of a refresher or a boost. And so the very first module, and by the way, the modules don't have to go in this order that I'm going to be talking about, but I want to give you a sense of those modules that are meant for people who are just starting, or as I said, kind of need a boost. But so there's a module on on the WISC framework, just really helping to make sure that everybody is on the same page, that they understand the model, they understand the 5 different tenets. With in this work, there's a focus on the health tenet, but then we go into the different 10 component areas, as well as the need for community engagement. And the interactive part of that module is the participants really start to look at how well, what's their school's level of engagement with regard to the WISC model, because all schools have something going on, and they may not know it, or they may not have called it, or put it in this WISC framework. So that's what that first module is about. The second module that is in that beginning group is building buy-in. And that's not only from administrators, but also from the schools. And that module really contains not only strategies for engaging administrators and teachers, but also the data, the why. Why is this framework so important? Why is health and education so important? So we go into some of the data, and I think that's an important module. Then there is a module on how do you go about creating a team? How do you organize the team? And so there's a lot of tools in that module that you can use to build out the team. And it's a good refresher for those that already have teams on ways that they might be able to enhance their efficiency and productivity. So there's one on teams. Then there's also a whole module on effective meetings and running effective meetings. And I think sometimes we move away from that. And the worst thing in schools is to bring together a group of teachers who are already very busy and not have a structured process. And they need to be able to walk away feeling like they have accomplished things. And so what we have done in that module is really tried to, outline the key pieces that we need to make sure are in any meeting for it to be effective and productive. So, talking about agendas and group norms, roles and responsibilities, and ways to engage lots of different people. And then the other module for that beginning is, well, where do we start? So how do we begin to assess? And so there is a whole module on assessing school health, where we look at a variety of school health assessment resources that schools can use to help prioritize their work. Looking at all that needs to be done can be overwhelming. And so by using one of these assessments, we really feel that helps to guide and focus the work of the WSC team. So starting with that needs assessment is a critical process. So those are the 5 that we really look at as, kind of essential for starting a WSC team. And, and boosting or getting existing teams excited. And then we have some others that we hope will help us to begin to explore and expand, teams. So we have a module that's called Transforming the School Environment. So it's looking at policy systems and environmental changes and helping school. We talk about that in the health world, but schools don't know that language. And so how can we take that language and put it into context that schools will understand, but that they can begin to see the difference between putting in a one-shot program and creating some systemic change that will impact the children that are in their school, not only today, but in future years. So getting them to think, bigger and broader in this school and health, or this education and health work. Another one of the modules is using data. And one of the things that we have seen in our work with schools is sometimes schools don't collect any health data. And schools that do oftentimes don't necessarily use it. And so we really felt that this was an area, schools are great at using data around academic outcomes, but not so much around health outcomes. And so we thought this would be a good one to help schools not only assess, but then begin to use data to really drive improvements in their school health work. Another area was communicating results. So there's a whole module focused on that. One of the things that we learned from interviewing the schools was there is some amazing work going on and nobody knows about it. And when I asked the question, and Jordan, you were asking these questions too, you were talking to these schools, what we found was that they comment about they're so busy doing the work that there's just not that time. But that's critically important. If we're to really help elevate school health in this country, we've got to be celebrating the successes. We've got to let people know too of the problem areas. And so there's a little piece in that about, how I think we call it failing forward, and, how failures or needs can really propel change. And so that we can't, we need to be communicating with our parents, our key stakeholders, our communities about this work. And so that whole module is really focused on making sure that we are communicating and we're thoughtful in terms of timing and, what content needs to be provided, and that it's ongoing. So I think that was very much a need that we heard within the interviews that we did, and just I really believe it's an important part of our work. There is another module focused on engaging youth, and that's probably my personal bias. And as I talked with some leaders across the state, some really impactful things are happening in school health when kids are engaged. And, when I look at the WSC model, the children are, at the center, and, I fully agree with that. But because kids are the recipients of the WSC model and of that work, we really need to make sure that we are hearing from them and we're engaging them in this work. So I think the youth engagement model is a really critical piece to this. And kids are just such tremendous advocates for this work, and we just need to capitalize that and make sure. I talked with a person in North Carolina, and she had been trying to transform some of the items that were being served in the school cafeteria. Well, this had been a 2-year battle working at the district level. Nothing happened. Brought kids into the fold, and within 3 months, they had lots of changes occurring with the school meal program because kids had a voice and they saw, school participation increase. And so I think just making sure that we're including that youth voice is critically important. So that is one of the other modules. And then the final module is around health equity. And I'll be honest, there's a lot going on in the world with that right now. And this was very much a basic level module. Much more needs to be done in this area. But what we found was there were schools that had never even heard of the word health equity. And so we realized that we needed to start that conversation and make sure that schools, are looking at that as they build out their plans. Because I think it helps them to focus with a different lens. So I know that's a lot, but I hope that provides everybody kind of with an overview of what the modules are and, the rationale a little bit behind why each of them was developed. And it was really based on what we heard from, practitioners and experts across the country.
That rationale is really helpful, and I think it will really help schools and states to decide on where they're going to start, and deciding where their needs find them, and also finding that you don't have to use the modules in sequence, just as you said.
Absolutely, they do not have to be used, and they're meant to stand alone. Really, there's in the training overview, and that's the first document you'll see when you go to the website. It really kind of outlines, how you get prepared for these trainings and such, but there's a planning sheet. And so, everybody needs to kind of review the different training, modules, and then you put them in the order in which you see them best fitting, with your organization. And just because we put, the first 5 as kind of for those schools that are starting, as I said, some existing schools we've already heard, they needed to go back in terms of how to make their meetings more engaging and productive. And so we just hope that people will use them in whatever order, they see fit. The other thing that I have found is I was called into a district to do a presentation with administrators, and basically they wanted to know about the WSC model. Well, in thinking about them, I was like, okay, I not only need to share the WSC model with them, but I need to bring them along in terms of why it's so important. And so I really combined information and activities from the WSC overview module and that building support or that data module that I talked to you about that has the rationale of why. And so I put, those two together for that training with administrators. And it was great because we started with the model and then we went into why it's so important with all the data. And I have never had as many principals taking pictures of slides as I did in that training. It was great. But then we came back to the model, so that they really understood, what it was, why it's so important, and now how do we need to think about making it a real framework within the district.
So that almost makes me think of our next question. So how long is a training or, running one module?
And that's a great question, Jordan. And I think what I have found as we have, started using these, with schools and districts, it really depends on the audience. The modules were designed to be about an hour in length. And What we tried to do with every module is to, because we understand that sometimes schools don't have that much time. And so what we did was we put some information towards the end of the training of recommendations of things that they might cut if they needed to shorten it. We also have some activities that we've added as optional. So there may be some, you've gone through this and there's more content that we felt, needed to be included. So we put them in as optional activities. I will tell you that was the greatest challenge in terms of trying to get, what is that essential content? Because there's so much that's important, but how can we pull in what's most important into that, 1 hour block of time? Another thing that I have found is when doing these trainings, it really depends on the group, because there are a lot of interactive and processing questions. And so there are some that, the conversation is so rich and, they're really doing great planning and talking about what's going on. So sometimes it can actually be longer. Sometimes it's shorter. So I think as you use it, as you use these, you just have to be flexible. And there may be times where you'll want to carry over some of the training to another meeting. Or it may be that you get through it very, very quickly. I just really think it depends on the group. But as I said, they were designed to be done or completed in an hour. And that's another good point, because what we did was we put time frames, recommended times for the different parts to keep it to an hour. But as I said, we have found as we've, gone into implementing, it really depends on the group that you're working with.
And if one is going to find the modules or is going to start at some point, and they can go to the instruction information in that overview sheet is their first point, is that the best place to go?
Yes. So if people are interested in getting started, I think the best place to go is there's an overview document, and that would be where I would recommend everybody go, because that's going to give you kind of an overview of all of the different modules. It's going to give you some specific steps in terms of, how to implement. That's where you'll find the facilitator tips. That's where you'll find, how to set up your training, some of that important information. But I think, once you've read through that, and you've decided on what module you want to implement, probably the best advice I can give anybody is please read the training script in its entirety. Don't look at the handouts. Don't look at the PowerPoint. You need to read the training script in its entirety to get a sense of what it is. Then go back and look at the handouts and the, and the PowerPoint. But as we have implemented that, that's the single most important strategy I can give people, because when people tried to start looking at everything, they got confused. If you just follow the training script, I think people will you'll get the flow. You'll get to see how the handout packet interacts, because for every activity that uses a handout, it says handout number 3, and in the handout packet, handout number 3 is labeled handout number 3. So everything really really connects. And, that's what we've heard from people that have started using them. But best advice is read the training script in its entirety, the first step.
That's a good piece of advice. And so after all of that, where can people go to access these modules?
Well, the modules are all posted on the Sophe website. And so you can go to, here we see it, this link, and then you can go into the different modules and download, print, or review the content online. So this is where all the good information is.
Thanks, Christi. So I have to ask you just one more question, of course. Do you have any final thoughts to share with a trainer or a trainee?
I guess I just hope that these resources will be of value to the field, and that they will help our schools expand, this very important work. And as we go, I just hope that people who are using the modules will share their successes, will share recommendations for additional modules or for modifications, with Sophe and with me, so that we can continue to, improve and expand this work. This has been, quite a process. We're very proud of what we've developed. But now the implementation is what's critically important. So we hope people will, go to the site, we'll use the materials, and then we'll provide Sophe with feedback so that we can improve, and expand this work. So.
Well, Christi, it has been such a pleasure to work with you throughout this entire project, and we're excited to just really keep working with these WISC training modules and to see more states and schools using them and asking questions and expanding this work, just like you said. So if anyone does have questions, they can, of course, contact education@sophia.org, or, of course, contact you, Christi. And we're really glad that we could talk more about the purpose, the use, and some really next steps of using these WISC training modules, and some really great advice and tips that you might not ever hear unless you were talking to the source. So thank you again so much for telling us this information.
Well, thank you. And I also want to give a shout out to all the people that were involved in this process. As I said, we had a fabulous advisory committee. We had experts, from across the country. We had, all of the schools who, took time to talk with us to really influence this work. Lot of people, a lot of energy, a lot of, outstanding advice, and work has gone into this. And Sophe has been, incredibly supportive, as has CDC. So we're just really excited. But now, as I said, implementation is what our next step is. So I hope to hear from people who are using them. And, I hope we can expand this work.
Thank you.